1. Beans, the cowboy's best friend. If there was one dish that defined the cowboy diet, it was beans. Pinto beans, slow-cooked in cast-iron pots, seasoned with salt, pepper, and bacon grease. Cowboys called it son of a gun stew. When they threw in everything from salt pork to scraps of jerky, beans were filling, easy to store, and provided the protein to keep men going through brutal days on horseback. Visual: beans simmering over a flickering campfire, a cowboy stirring slowly with a wooden spoon, smoke rising into the twilight. 2. Salt pork, the protein of the plains. Before refrigeration, fresh meat was a luxury. Cowboys relied on salt pork, heavily cured slabs of fat and meat, stored in barrels of brine. It was greasy, salty, and sometimes unpleasant, but it kept them alive. They'd fry it with biscuits or chop it into beans for a flavor boost. And on the trail, that salt wasn't just for taste, it helped replace what sweat took away. 3. Sourdough biscuits. If beans were the body, biscuits were the soul of cowboy cooking. Every chuck wagon had its sourdough starter, a living yeast culture passed from cook to cook. They'd bake biscuits in Dutch ovens buried under coals, golden brown and smoky. The camp cook, often the most respected man after the trail boss, guarded his sourdough like gold. Voiceover: a cowboy without coffee could survive. A cowboy without biscuits, never. Arbuckle's coffee, liquid courage. Coffee wasn't just a drink, it was a ritual. Cowboys swore by Arbuckles, the first pre-roasted coffee sold across America. They brewed it thick, sometimes strong enough to float a horseshoe. Even in dust storms, a cup of coffee around the fire was a sacred pause between chaos and silence. Visual: a hand pouring black coffee from a tin pot, steam curling against the sunrise. 5. Dried fruit, the rare sweetness. Cowboys carried dried peaches, apples, or raisins, not for luxury, but necessity. Vitamin C was scarce on the trail, and dried fruit helped prevent scurvy. On lucky days, the cook would stew them into a sweet compote with sugar, if available. A rare dessert that made the men feel human again. 6. Hardtack, the indestructible bread. Hardtack was the original survival food. Flour, water, and salt baked into a rock-hard cracker. It could last years if kept dry. Cowboys softened it by soaking it in coffee or soup, sometimes complaining that it could break a tooth faster than a wild bronco. Still, it filled the belly when there was nothing else left. 7. Chuck wagon stew, everything in the pot. Whatever the cowboys had, beans, bacon, jerky, onions, maybe a stray rabbit, went into one pot. It wasn't gourmet, but it was hearty, smoky, and shared around the fire with laughter and stories. The stew changed every night depending on what they hunted or traded for. Visual: close-up of bubbling stew, sizzling meat, and the glow of firelight on weathered faces. 8. Cowboy jerky, trailside survival. Jerky was both meal and insurance. Thin strips of beef, buffalo, or venison were dried with salt and smoke, lasting weeks without spoiling. Cowboys chewed it on the go. No need to stop or cook. It was tough, but so were they. Sometimes they'd grind jerky into powder, mix it with fat and dried fruit, creating a proto-energy bar known as pemmican. 9. Prairie chicken and game meat. When luck struck, cowboys hunted. Prairie chickens, rabbits, or deer roasted over open flames gave them a taste of fresh protein. The cook would season it with salt pork grease and wild herbs. A brief luxury before days of beans again. 10. Slapjack pancakes. Made from flour, water, and grease, slapjacks were cowboy pancakes, cooked right on a skillet over coals. Sometimes topped with molasses or bacon drippings, they were the morning's fuel before the long ride ahead. 11. Bacon and grease gravy. When bacon was available, it was liquid gold. Cowboys fried strips of salt-cured bacon and saved the fat. Nothing went to waste. They used it to make grease gravy, whisked with flour and poured over biscuits or slapjacks. It was smoky, salty, and satisfying, a small taste of home in a world of endless dust. Some said you could tell how good a cook was by the color of his gravy. The richer and darker, the better. Visual. A cowboy pouring thick gravy from a tin cup, steam rising against the morning light. 12. Trail potatoes. Potatoes were rare, but when the chuck wagon carried them, they were a feast. Cowboys boiled or fried them with onions and bacon fat. Sometimes they mashed them into beans to stretch the meal. When supplies ran low, they roasted them directly in campfire ashes, pulling them out charred, smoky, and perfect. Voiceover. In a world without luxury, even a single potato could feel like a Sunday dinner. 13. Cornmeal mush. Cornmeal was a cowboy staple. It could become mush, cornbread, or pancakes. To make mush, the cook boiled cornmeal in water until thick and smooth, then served it hot with molasses if they had any. Cold leftovers were sliced, fried, and eaten again for breakfast. No waste, no frills, just sustenance. 14. Molasses, the liquid sweetener. Sugar was rare, but molasses was the next best thing. Thick, sweet, and shelf-stable, it flavored everything from biscuits to coffee. Cowboys even used it to coat jerky or drizzle over slapjacks. When a tin of molasses came out of the chuck wagon, it was like Christmas morning. Visual. Molasses dripping slowly onto a biscuit in the glow of firelight. 15. Corn Dodger bread. Corn dodgers were small, dense cakes of cornmeal and bacon grease baked in iron pans. Easy to carry and filling, they were perfect for long rides. Cowboys nicknamed them belly bricks, but in desperate times a brick was better than an empty stomach. A cowboy would sometimes joke, "You could throw a dodger at a coyote and kill it, but it'll still taste good." 16. Fried salt pork sandwiches. Yes, even cowboys made sandwiches. 2 biscuits, some fried salt pork, and maybe a smear of beans made a quick trail lunch. They ate while riding, using their knees to guide their horses. Simple, greasy, salty. The sandwich of the frontier. 17. Coffee grounds, soup, a desperate meal. When supplies dwindled and the cook ran out of food, cowboys improvised. Sometimes they'd boil old coffee grounds, toss in crumbs of hardtack, and call it soup. It was bitter, black, and almost undrinkable, but it filled the void. These were men who laughed in the face of hunger, their humor sharper than their knives. Voiceover. The wild didn't care about comfort. You either made do or you went hungry. 18. Dandelion greens and wild herbs. Cowboys often foraged from the land. Dandelion greens, wild onions, and cactus fruit became part of their meals. They'd sauté the greens in bacon fat or throw them into stew for freshness. This wasn't farm to table, it was survival to table. 19. Desperation stew. When nothing else remained, the cook threw together a desperation stew, bits of jerky, beans, maybe a potato or two, and water. It was a meal born from the will to survive. Even on the harshest nights around that fire, the stew was more than food. It was unity. Each cowboy got his portion, no one was left hungry, and for a brief moment, they weren't just men, they were family. Visual, close-up of tin bowls passed hand to hand, steam rising as laughter echoes in the distance. 20. Coffee and cigarettes, the cowboy dessert. Dessert? Rarely. But after dinner, a cup of black coffee and a cigarette or a rolled-up leaf of tobacco was the cowboy's way to end the day. They'd stare into the fire, their faces painted by the glow, talking about home, mothers, wives, lost loves, or dreams they'd never chase. Voiceover. In those moments, the cowboy wasn't just a man of the range. He was a soul trying to remember what peace felt like. Scene transition, twilight on the range. The prairie hums with the sounds of night. Crickets, distant coyotes, the crackle of wood. The chuck wagon stands quiet now. The cook leans against a wheel, sipping coffee, his hat tilted over his eyes. Voiceover, softly. The open range was both heaven and hell. The meals may have been simple, but they told a story of endurance, of men who turned hardship into heritage. To be continued. Next batch continues with the final cowboy foods, from makeshift desserts to rare feasts and the emotional bond of the chuck wagon table. 21. Sour biscuits and honey. Every cowboy dreamed of honey. Sweet, golden, rare. When they stumbled upon a hive during a trail stop, it was like striking gold. The cook would bake sour biscuits, made from leftover sourdough starter, and drizzle honey on top. It was heaven in a world of grit. Some said the taste alone could make a man forget he hadn't bathed in a month. Visual. A cowboy laughing as he spreads honey with a pocket knife. Bees buzzing lazily in the sun. 22. Dried apples and wild fruit. When supplies allowed, dried apples were packed into sacks and added to stews or eaten raw on the trail. But when they rode through canyons or wooded valleys, they picked wild berries and cactus fruit. Some would mash them with sugar, if they had any, and make a crude jam, spreading it on hardtack or biscuits. In a world where everything tasted of smoke and dust, that burst of sweetness was a reminder that nature still offered gifts. Chuck wagon cobbler, the rare treat. Once in a blue moon, when luck favored the crew, the cook made a chuck wagon cobbler. He'd toss together canned peaches, biscuit dough, and a bit of sugar in a Dutch oven, bury it under hot coals and let it bake. When the lid finally lifted, the smell alone made men whistle. That bubbling golden crust was a feast fit for kings, and for one night the cowboys were kings. Voiceover. After weeks of beans and bacon, a spoonful of cobbler could bring tears to a grown man's eyes. 24. Sourdough and beans, the unofficial cowboy national dish. No food defined cowboy life more than sourdough and beans. Sourdough was salted pork belly, cheap, tough, and salty enough to last months. The cook boiled it with beans, onions, and maybe a pinch of chili powder if luck allowed. Every camp, every trail, every cowboy, they all knew that smell. It meant comfort, survival, and familiarity. Some joked that beans were the cowboy's best friend. They'll fill your belly and clear the camp at the same time. But deep down, everyone knew. The smell of beans simmering in a blackened pot meant home. Visual. A slow ladle pouring beans into a tin bowl, firelight reflecting in the sauce. 5. Coffee, the cowboy's bloodline. If there was one thing a cowboy couldn't live without, it was coffee. They drank it in the morning, after meals, and sometimes even before bed. Ground coarse and boiled in soot-black pots, it was strong enough to float a horseshoe. No cream, no sugar, just bitter, black, and honest. They'd pour it steaming into tin mugs, sip slow, and stare into the dark horizon. Coffee wasn't just a drink, it was a ritual. It carried them through cold nights, endless trails, and lonely hearts. Voiceover, slow, reflective. They say cowboys didn't bleed red, they bled black coffee and dust. Closing scene, the legacy of the cowboy table. As dawn breaks, the camera drifts across an empty campsite, ashes glowing faintly, tin cups overturned, the prairie stretching endless and quiet. A lone rider saddles up and glances back once, his silhouette framed by the rising sun. Voiceover. Out on the open range, food was more than fuel. It was identity. Every pot of beans, every biscuit, every sip of coffee told a story of resilience. These weren't just meals. They were symbols of a time when survival was art and simplicity was glory. Soft guitar strums fade in. The wind carries the sound of hooves into the distance. Voiceover, final words. The cowboy's table may be gone, but the taste of the trail, the courage in every bite, still lingers in the heart of the American West. End scene, fade to black. Text on screen. The open range never ends, it just rides into memory. Cinematic notes for production. Tone. Gritty, emotional, rooted in authenticity. Visuals. Golden sunsets, crackling campfires, close-ups of rough hands breaking bread. Soundtrack. Minimalist western strings and ambient wind. Voice. Deep, resonant, slightly gravelly. A storyteller who's lived these memories.